This is An Infinite Path, spoken word essays by Niles Heckman, some of which go on to become our documentary short subject films, half of which release freely here through the podcast, all of which can be found through your support at nilesheckman.com. So, if you haven't figured it out yet, the growth in regards to these essays is spiritual growth. Personal growth is a more watered-down way to say that, and thus likely appeals to more people. Yet personal ultimately really means spiritual. When this spiritual growth term is said, which is quite rarely, there is oftentimes delusions around what it really means. People think it is woo or chuckle-worthy, for example. So let's rewind the tape deck back a bit and ask ourselves, what is spiritual growth? What does that really mean? Well, mapping that is a 64,000-hour conversation, but we will begin to do our ever so slightest part in attempting such through this first in what will surely be a multiple series of essays on the subject. A most basic, simple, sexy statement regarding it can first be answered, it's why you're here. It's what life is for, to grow spiritually. You have transited here into this realm, into a body, for a series of cycles to learn and grow through experience and struggle. This material 3D aspect of that just happens to have polarization as one of its main teaching tools on the subject. This is a slow process. Nature, the spiritual teacher, grows slowly. It's way quicker to cut down trees with creepy loud industrial machines than it is to grow them. Plants grow in the seasons with the solar and lunar cycles, naturally. That's unless you're running an industrial pot farm under lights. Children grow into adults. Adults tend to stop growing on both ends and just start growing in the middle. But this growth we speak of is not physical so much. Spiritual growth is the growth, empowerment, and expansion of the inside, our inner experience, the innermost, Atman. Have you ever noticed that in your adult life, when you improve something within yourself, you basically get no outside credit for it? That's your spiritual growth. When in balance and harmony, this is the natural process human beings will do through their evolution. Physical evolution is another topic, but we are speaking mainly of growth through evolution in consciousness. Learning new things and applying them to practice and adjusting the way you live your life. All spiritual growth will go counter to what is unreal, which is most of industrialized, mechanized, and consumerist culture. For that culture is backwards, and it is the real counterculture. This is not by accident, for shadowy, malevolent empire, which in the days of genocide, colonialization, overt slavery, overworking, and other forms of redlining human beings to their breaking points was at its most fierce. That negative aspect of the world very much still exists today, mainly in totalitarian and more gangster countries, but in more democratic countries which supposedly have their shit a bit more together, it exists in more covert ways with just a lighter version of these same negative goings-on, which are being de-occulted right now. For as Philip K. Dick once said, the empire never ended. The main goal of this shadowy, malevolent ethos is to try and crush the spiritual growth of every awakening human. It is politically irrelevant which way one swings, for there is centralization in all areas of systems. But basically, any centralization is a bad thing because it has always and will continue to always try and hold power by the few over the many. Thus, the black iron prison, as Dick also called it, need only infect, seed, or co-opt those who are to be put at the tops of the resource hierarchy and constantly continue its negative attrition of the populace. The Gnostic teachings speak much of this shadowy control structure from a deeper metaphysical perspective. But a Cliff Notes teaching from it is that there are always forces at work trying to keep us down from the top down. This is the problem with any sort of large institution, which culturally we are generally told to look up toward for the solution to our problems, aren't we? A more common perspective is who we elect will save us, or us going to a large university to get our schooling, which is not education, or we aspire to work for the large corporation which has offices throughout the world, or look to this series of governmental, regulatory, or supposedly non-profit organizations or cultural institutions to help control the flow of resources. Through most of human history, in more enlightened times, We were more locally educated by wise elders we knew more personally, or else we were trained to work in apprenticeships for practical skills and trades. In darker times, we've spent thousands of years being under the boot of top-down structures, whether they were the king or the church, or today governmental or multinational corporations, when in more natural ways of living in indigenous and tribal societies, in towns and villages, was from the bottom up, hence the mirrored back-to-frontness. If you go to what little remaining bookstores there are today outside of the Death Star main online bookstore and look at books on growth, they will usually be through the lens of modernity, which reminder is still covertly co-opted when it used to be overtly co-opted, to associate growth with business growth. We see this type of pro-growth lamestream mindset more often. Thus, one should aspire to grow a business in the marketplace. So most of these growth books will solely be about expanding or growing your business, which when turned into large industry becomes a cancer on a planet of infinite metaphysical potential but finite material resources. You may even have a friend or acquaintance who's created multiple companies and sold one or two of them. Perhaps they're worth somewhere between $10 and $100 million, and their LinkedIn profile is covered in the word growth. They are held up as the pinnacle of success in mainstream, backwards, upside-down, not-your-friend culture because they have won the game of big commerce by growing businesses but not themselves. Yet the problem here is the inside is the cause and the outside is the effect. So how is your business you create, whatever it is, however successful in commerce it becomes, going to be good and beneficial to society and the planet if the people starting it have little to no internal spiritual growth? We learn and grow through struggle and difficulty, both individually and in the aggregate in groups. Most of one's life learning comes through their mistakes or revealings. The beginning of spiritual growth is the ability to work through difficulty and or be drawn towards the deeper things of the world. Being interested in not solely mindless entertainment, but bettering yourself. Some folks seem to have this when they are young, others come to it later in life, and many never seem to have it at all. Generally, you the individual come to realize you are different from other folks. You are a deeper well. Perhaps you're a tween who wants to read Mark Twain rather than watching the World Wrestling Federation. Or you're an older teenager who studies hard in school so you can get out of your underprivileged community and make something of yourself, while your siblings are just essentially wasting away. The point is you are trying to better yourself. There is more to you. Or sometimes the personal growth process is really catalyzed through a major trauma, an unexpected shaking or even crumbling of your foundation through a multiplicity of unfortunate events. Or other times it is just many layers of an onion being peeled away over many decades. The classic modern example is an unwillingness in your younger years to follow the pre-programmed paths your asleep ancestors prescribed and expected of you. For example, you decide to travel the world for years instead of going to college, or a midlife crisis of the loss of a job or complete loss of your industry, which if you are weak-willed, you can drink a bottle of Jack Daniels and then put a shotgun in your mouth over, or you can do something about it structurally by changing your life. However and whenever it begins, one must constantly be asking questions rather than believing most, if not everything they are told by others. For we have a society of children raising children because of lack of direct experiences. If someone doesn't want to question the status quo, think it's just fine for their life and society, then there is no reason to say much of anything related to this subject or of any other sort of life depth to them. They want to live their life in a shallow baby pool rather than going swimming in the depths of the ocean. Yet due to that shallowness, they are subject to desperation of clinging on to comfort, objects, possessions, security, and lust. They are secretly suffering behind the scenes. Propaganda works great on these people, so there is a vested interest by the powers that be to keep them this way. The metaphor of a path is common regarding this process, which has many generations of use through the ages, but was brought more into the forefront by L. Frank Baum in his seminal and famous American classic book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. A theosophical story which, like many seminal stories of a hero's journey, embody this tale. In that case, the characters walk a yellow brick road, whether it be Dorothy, the awakening human, Toto, her subconscious, the Tin Man, devotion, the Scarecrow, understanding, or better said as overstanding, and the Cowardly Lion, willpower. Walking on a journey, a single character or small group of characters proceed forward through life-changing struggle and betterment to solve problems and arrive at an improved destination. While the masses are held under shadowy control, stagnating or descending, The leading-edge folks, like Dorothy and her team, who are interested in betterment, are on an ascendant path. The yellow brick road, which when followed long enough via transmutation of the individual, can lead to internal gold. This is a process of constant learning, improving, betterment, and moving forward within oneself, which will likely put you off at a 45-degree angle from past friends, family members, and colleagues who are not willing or wanting to look outside their tiny cubicles, and their children they are raising to sit inside future cubicles. They have no interest in walking the walk or finding that esoteric gold. They just want to make money and be entertained by culturally sanctioned sources, and maybe, if they're lucky, go on vacation. They could care less about a process of constant learning, improvement, betterment, and forward movement within oneself, which is what ascendant path walking is all about. And one constant lingering truth is you oftentimes get no credit for doing it outside of yourself. No pats on the back, only frowns and wonders about your mental state by those from inside the insane asylum of standard operating procedure. Since most, if not everything, we are told growing up is a lie in order to indoctrinate us and thus disempower us, the beginning of spiritual growth should be quite disillusioning. For we have built up walls of lies and illusions which we think is material reality. Much of individual and even large group improvement is realizing that the society and culture are a hot mess. As Patrick Swayze's character Dalton says in the 1989 cinematic masterpiece film Roadhouse, it will get worse before it gets better. This is what is going on Spaceship Earth right now. Systems are in 5-alarm meltdown. It is the process that nature and larger cosmic forces are forcing us to go through with all the Earth changes happening now. It is the Tower card in Tarot. It is the fire which burns the old decaying matter, both metaphysically and physically. It must happen at an individual level as well as in larger group levels. But it will never be everyone. The proletariat majority shuts down themselves, so this is for the less, not the most. Yet more people are waking up now than have in a long time, prophesied by many ancient cultures such as the Toltecs and the Mayans. And what is this term called waking up? It doesn't mean being physically awake, but mentally waking. Since the masses are in a deep sleep state, which entails darkness and suffering with no self-awareness, they are in a significantly reduced form of what they are capable of being. For the species as a whole has forgotten who they are. They have amnesia. Initially, this waking process is thinking the world is not what you have previously thought it to be. Early on, fancy and glamorizing new agey claims appeal and are interesting, for they are more exciting than robot drudgery. One becomes more open to wild ideas regarding physical things such as UFOs, stargates, pyramids under the ice, or the channeled teachings from the Palladian Dolphin Clan. One will buy anything. Conspiracy is another definitely visited step along the way, questioning society and authority, which certainly requires the ability to unlearn what you have learned. And finding some conspiracies are untrue, but many of them happen to be very true. Another step is the questioning of your very reality itself, removing the veils of what this is and what you are in. As your discernment improves, you look less at glamorizing advanced engineering projects and begin to wonder what information and insights were required by those ancients to be able to outwardly manifest such things. Aiming to find folks from the past who held up the most leading-edge knowledge. Coming to realize they're not world-renowned scholars or academics or pharaohs, but rough outsiders who learned in dark times to keep their mouths shut or else transmit knowledge through direct, in-the-flesh interaction or in secret traditions. Things such as apostolic succession and mystery schools become keys of interest due to their ability to guide personal individual experiences from behind the scenes. Crucial because initiates from the past and the present realize that information is not transformation, and first-hand wisdom gained must be put into practice. Only then can it lead to realizing that the 5 senses are not all that there is. This usually requires effort, leaps of faith, and tough swallows, often discovered solo in very personal and synchronistic ways. For the realm that you've been placed into to grow is a learning lab, and you must do the coursework yourself. So it's a system designed to work individually. Weak people need others all the time, like a little child. One who's been doing this for years becomes much more strong-willed and doesn't so much need outside influences. Becoming an adult through initiations into adulthood and self-reliance. Tribal cultures had this for eons, and it kept them in balance with nature. The young student will get to a point where they can go off and do their own thing. They have been given a set of tools to journey solo. The majority who have done this are working on themselves, not egotistically, but inwardly. So they are typically names which you have not heard. They are not voiced by the many, for the majority will not listen to them. They are the Jedi who go against the grain, the shaman who live on the outside of the village. They can, but don't necessarily have to, spend significant amounts of time alone and be completely content. They look forward to their isolation for study, contemplation, creation, and real work. Later on, one will continually look deeper and deeper within oneself. This is the key to finding equilibrium in your internal life so you can help bring equilibrium to others in your outer life, which is what most are not willing to do. The restructuring of your own bad habits. Defending beliefs and options which are actually not yours, but a misguided notion of previous generations. We must change negative habits into positive habits in order to go beyond all habits. Many want to pretend like they're going through this process but are not. Why? Because it's too much work. It's too hard to restructure and change all aspects of your untrue life. They may have outward or sometimes even inward vacations which give hint that this material reality is not all that there is, but they are unwilling to fix their profession, their friends, or their family because that can just be decades of uphill struggle. It's easier to just change things on the surface. Having children can regress or retard this process. Existential philosophy talks about how when many have the base necessities down in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they then have time to engage and do things. For example, in the United States, we had a thriving middle class after World War II. Many good jobs with pensions, benefits, and very cheap or even free school in the California State UC schooling system. That and Albert Hofmann discovering a molecule which was a mass distribution deconditioning agent to counter what Oppenheimer had discovered in the splitting of the atom gave rise to the 60s, which was a wave of higher consciousness which absolutely terrified the doom prophets of industrialization. As a result, the following decades have been spent smashing down and reducing the middle class so they are in a more fight-or-flight, red-lined, fear-based mindset. A continued attempted movement towards totalitarianism to crush that free time and space needed for inward movement is not by accident. Yet a more covert and gentle way to do this is the encouragement of having multiple children. For children take staggering amounts of your time, and the proletariat is all too happy to fill that potential ascended discovery time with instead just raising children. Working middle-class professional people do this responsibly, and poor people do this irresponsibly. One way to tell a really devout warrior on the path, though, one devoted to the mystery, is they likely will not have had children. It's possible to do it with kids, or much more likely a single child, but the hardest thing you'll ever do is even harder while being a parent. Try finding time to meditate first thing in the morning when you have a 3-year-old. It's nearly impossible. So this work not only requires time, space, and introspection, but also being ruthlessly honest with oneself. For a major problem that keeps students from moving forward in mid to later stages of spiritual growth on the path is the oftentimes gaping canyon between what they think they are and what they really are like. So until that gap is heavily reduced, if not completely closed, the only work you can do on yourself is on a fictional version of you. And then you're back to your fictional world of your credit rating, sports team, and car insurance. Folks cling to those lies desperately. They want to adorn themselves in their fashion trends, not actually do the hardest work you can do, spiritual work which is in alignment with the great work. This is why so many claim they're interested in spirituality, living a spiritual life, having a spiritual book or podcast, yet extremely few folks are really working on self-transformation. They want to rearrange the furniture in the living room, but don't realize the foundation of the house is rotten. Hence the tarot card of the Tower. One must tear down or burn down the old house before you can build a new. For during the process, as the gears turn, if it is entered into consciously, it may stay. But if it was entered into unconsciously, it will go. Trust me, it will dissolve in alchemical distillation. As they say in Sufism, if you have not found a spiritual path that has made you somewhat want to run away, then you have not found a real spiritual path. If the spiritual path does not lead you to places you never thought you would go, then it's also not a spiritual path. Your positive change in life, through mind and heart, can be shown not by what you say, but what your deeds and conduct are. There are a lot of folks out there who say interesting things, yet their lives are as messed up as someone with water between the ears who watches Fox News thinking it's anything other than propagandistic mind control. Folks within the New Age, occult, or festival communities may claim they've had cool experiences, but how have they integrated those experiences into their lives, into path-walking practice, which is just the same as those who have problems within psychiatry, therapy, or even guruship, trying to look inside others while not being willing to look within themselves. Now, all this being said, let's give yourself some credit. For if you are even listening to this, you are clearly going through this process. If you don't outright reject, but understand, identify, and resonate even the slightest with what's being said here, it's not like a foreign language to you. If you haven't turned this off with eye rolls and disgust, then you are progressing and growing a beautiful rose. Slowly out of the mud, as the Rosicrucians would say. It's not a race. This is decades, if not centuries, if not lifetimes of uphill walking and even climbing. Life should be a joy with little problems each day. Look no further than one's own life, their real life, not their social media fake life, to see how they are really doing in this process. Many folks' lives are a mess, thus the society is a mess. The work one puts in will mirror their outward environment. As a result, it should make you a much happier person with less suffering. So straight up, with all that's going on in the world, even with conscious knowledge of it, is the individual truly a happy person? Are they being who they really want to be? Are they really living life for their own inner self? Are they doing it to be in service to solely themselves, or in service to themselves so they can be in service to others? In terms of pathways to access inner self, Hinduism, divination, Buddhism, shamanism, Tantra, Kabbalah, Yogism, Taoism, palmistry, Rosicrucianism, mysticism, astrology, hermetism, tarot, etc. are all forms of spiritual practice which at their inner esoteric cores give their own sets of tools to help with this process of spiritual growth. Thus begins the mention of alchemy, which later chapters of this series will get more into. Real esoteric alchemy is advanced work with this process, transmutation of self. The alchemist said it is a divine act to turn copper or lead into gold and silver. But why do we do this? Why would we want to? Because no matter how hard it is, no matter what is sacrificed, it's worth it to do it. For the world is truly deeply magical, and the last thing Shadow wants is for the light to access magic. The work of doing it, if one is in honor and excellent, does eventually allow for access to a repository of all potential. This is the beginning of the stereotypical term enlightenment, which really means more of filling a vessel with light, which is said to be the Akash in Sanskrit, done through the classic four elements of earth, air, fire, and water, which are both literal physical elements and subtle energies and psychological spiritual forces. Processes of creation. As one becomes more spiritually adept, and there are very few that do, one is able to do things with these elements. This is where human beings can gain higher demigod-like capabilities. X-Men superhero-like style powers, if you will. Folks like Nicholas Flamel, Paracelsus, Mila Agrippa, Hermes Trismegistus, Jesus of Nazareth, Basil Valentine, Quetzalcoatl, whether corporeal or not, were all adept magicians and more enlightened masters. If you can command the elements within yourself, you can command them outside of yourself. In the past and present, a human can make it rain, levitate themselves or things, stop a threat and turn that threat against themselves solely with their mind, and much more. This is not just something which could only be seen in comic books. So, as we wind this first part down with that sexy tease, we will touch base on what was said at the beginning of this, saying this could be a 64,000-hour conversation, with a multiple series comprised of many dozens of these essays. Although this author is very much only a student of these things, and thus is only as far enough along to perhaps give a few of them at this point in his life, in future chapters we will add more non-linear layers to this, going back and revisiting some elements which were touched on here in more detail, introducing other aspects, and also picking up more from where this left off. Coming your way slowly and periodically, just like the process itself.